Now, while the AU remains in pursuit of the continent's own ratings agency, the body's lead expert for country support on ratings agencies, Mishek Mutize, questions the alarm Fitch has raised with investors in terms of the Mpox outbreak in Africa and its possible impact on government finances. He suggests that Fitch's statement on the virus is yet another example of how the ratings agency uses a much more negative lens to view events on the continent as opposed to one it uses for the West. Mishek joins us with greater perspective on his take on this matter. Thank you so much for your time, Mishek. Now, has the spread of Mpox in Africa accelerated to levels of economic pressure, or is it something that ratings agencies are flagging as an economic risk currently?
Well, that's precisely where the question is. But let me start by thanking you for having me. So you find that the views of rating agencies in cautioning risk in Africa has been over-exaggerated. In this particular instance, I made reference to that in response to one of the articles that were on Reuters news agency, which was claiming that there is no statistical bias and there is no study at all that proves that there is statistical bias against Africa. And you know, to be honest, I think at this point we shouldn't be arguing about whether there is bias or not, because there is clear statistical evidence that analyst views on Africa has been grossly pessimistic. And with reference to monkeypox in particular, in our view, the monkeypox outbreak has not been at a stage where a risk could be flagged to the extent of straining the fiscus of government. Because, like, for instance, that time South Africa had only one a case that was reported, as well as I think about 6 other countries out of the total number of countries that CDC was monitoring. And for us, the problematic view that the rating agency presented, that there could be a high possibility that there is underreporting. That perspective alone was really problematic, because it creates an impression that governments in Africa are not honest, and sometimes they have no capacity to track some of these outbreaks. But also underlooking that there's been several outbreaks that have been managed, like the virus itself, and you know, several other diseases that has been managed in the continent that other continents might not have managed better than Africa has done.
I mean, it's quite interesting also that you talk about the underreporting and really what it kind of implies about, you know, the capacity of government to actually, you know, monitor, outbreaks like this. Are the ratings agencies also are they in conversation and constant conversation with the global health organizations in terms of, you know, when they say these statements, that they are in touch and in alignment with them? Or is it just a case of they're just flagging risks but not really in touch with what is actually happening on the ground?
You are absolutely on point. That's exactly where our thrust is, that the agencies are out of touch completely with the developments in Africa or the context in Africa. When they hear that there is a monkeypox outbreak in one country, to them, all the countries in Africa are at risk of not managing the spread of such diseases. So it brings now the point of why we say these analysts are making such pronouncements from a foreign jurisdiction, like that particular case of Fitch. The analyst is based in Hong Kong to make such a pronouncement. They have not interacted with the domestic context to understand what are the possibilities of such a spread or such impressions that they are created on the ground. And this also, you know, outlines that there is a disconnect between the interactions or the sharing of information that should happen for such a pronouncement to be based on facts. And you find that even if they would be in close discussion with the health centers globally or continentally, their perspective would have been slightly different.
I mean, Mishek, you also talk about the fact that Africa has managed to navigate previous outbreaks like we had with COVID-19. Do you think that even if we would get to a point of Mpox acceleration, that we do have buffers and learnings that could help from, for example, COVID-19?
Absolutely so. I think we did raise several observations with how the impression of a complete outbreak of health systems was being propagated during COVID. But it later turned out that most of the African countries did much, much better than other advanced economies did in managing the pandemic. So to us, this impression that African governments or African countries are in the worst position of managing any shock from any particular point of the economic sphere, I think it's over-exaggerated. And this has been evidence from the past positions that governments in Africa has been able to manage. And the impact has not been anywhere near the impression that has been created, especially by the rating agencies themselves.
Mishek, just lastly, because I mean, clearly there's a very big disconnect in terms of what the ratings agencies believe that the African continent is capable of and what we have proven that we are capable of. Whose job then, or where does the responsibility lie in kind of closing this disconnect? Does it solely rest on the African continent to show, these global institutes that actually this is what's happening and this is what we are capable of?
Well, I think rating agencies themselves, they've got a huge responsibility to clear that information gap, because by the nature of their work, they bridge information asymmetry between investors and the issuers, which are governments and entities in Africa in this particular instance. Because most of the investors that bring money to Africa do not have first-hand information about the instruments and the entities that they invest in. So they view rating agencies as sources of credible information for them to make investment decision and also to develop their own perspective of risk, which then builds into the interest rate that they would demand. So having occupied that role, the rating agencies should be responsible in the narrative that they create to such investors, because the moment they create such a pessimistic view, then investors normally change their position immediately in response to that, and mostly is by increasing the cost of borrowing on the same amount of debt. So to us, the view is that rating agencies need to do more, to invest more in understanding the context of Africa and having their analysts do more research in the governments and entities that they rate, so that they are not very conservative in their view, and they are not raising the risk premium through such negative pronouncements, even when they are not necessary.
All right. Well, we do have to wrap up the conversation. They're very, very interesting. And thank you so much for giving us your insights on that, Mishek. That was the AU's lead expert for country support on ratings agencies, Mishek Mutize. That's how I leave things with you. But be sure to stay tuned for lots more coming up right here on Business Day TV.